Shelton did not have a normal childhood by any means. From the time she was born, Shelton lived in a house of horror.
My brother and I would be captive into the corner of a room where we were forced to watch my mother held down on the floor with her head beaten against the bathtub.
But as a little girl, Shelton thought that's how life was supposed to be.
It was such a way of living that to me it really wasn't abuse. I didn't know it to be abuse.
Born in 1954 in Virginia Beach, Shelton was the third of 4 children. She says her father was a well-liked, successful businessman. But at home, she says she saw and felt what outsiders didn't: physical, sexual, and emotional abuse.
My dad was a very loving man, and many people liked him. I loved him. But inside was a monster.
A monster, Shelton says, that would strike often without warning. The trigger, Shelton says, would be as trivial as a television set turned on during the day.
When he would come home, he would place his hand on the television, and if the TV was hot, he knew that the TV had been turned on during the day, and therefore he would abuse us horrifically.
But there were days, Shelton says, she knew a beating was coming.
Most often I would see it in his eyes first, and then his whole demeanor would change. And I knew at that time that it was get out of the room or be trapped.
She would take shelter in the woods.
My brother and I sometimes would have to escape in the middle of the night, go out a back door, in our pajamas, in the freezing cold.
Later as an adult, Shelton became an alcoholic and drug addict. She would also cut herself to relieve the emotional pain. At one point, turned suicidal. She's sharing her story as lawmakers tried to stiffen penalties for child abusers. Delegate Bill Janus introduced legislation after prosecutors in Louisa reached out to him about an 8-year-old girl tortured by her own grandmother for wetting her bed. Laura Jewell pleaded guilty in November to felony child abuse, neglect, and malicious wounding, but not torture, after prosecutors withdrew the charge, questioning whether it could apply to the case. Right now, the torture statute falls under a subsection in the child labor law. Delegate Janus wants to make it a standalone criminal code. Shelton says her father, who died in 1981, was never successfully prosecuted for abuse.
Without this House bill, they are not in prison long enough to be able to deliver the safety that's needed for these families.
The proposed legislation did not make it out of committee. Supporters hope to bring it back up next year, including Shelton, who says she can't understand what could be more important than a child's life. Shelton heads up Prevent Child Abuse Hampton Roads. She's often troubled by the horrific stories other children tell, but says she is now able to give them a voice.
I am allowed to be able to help in any way possible, to be a warrior for children who are being abused, to help them find justice.